Good morning, Erin. Today I'm going to tell you about a book called The Sun-Blessed Prince by Lindsey Byrd. The Sun-Blessed Prince is the first book in a fantasy duology, and when I first picked it up, I was expecting a romantasy, but it's much more of a straight high fantasy with a light romantic subplot. For starters, the series actually has three main protagonists, though one of them doesn't show up until a few chapters into the book. The book takes place in a world where there tend to be two kind of magic users, either givers or reapers. Givers are mainly considered healers, though they also have the frowned upon and mostly illegal powers of bringing people back from the dead and inducing pregnancies via touch. Reapers have the opposite power where they kill anything they touch. The powers are often linked to the two main gods within the series, a god of life and a goddess of death. There are two main kingdoms in this series, and that really helps keep the fantasy names and elements a lot more simple for someone like me who does not do well trying to remember all the different countries and politics and proper nouns and all that that's usually in high fantasy. There's the Sun Kingdom, Soleils, that mainly worships the god of life and celebrates givers and has a low population of reapers, and Alalun, the Moon Kingdom, who worship the goddess of death, and they tend to frown upon both reapers and givers, though they have a higher proportion of reapers. One of the main three points of view we get is from Elysian, the eponymous sun-blessed prince of the Kingdom of Soleils, and he is a giver despite the fact that it is supposed to be forbidden for givers to inherit the throne in their world because givers and reapers are essentially immortal. They can die, but only when their god deems it their time. The second protagonist, Cat, is introduced when he tries to assassinate Elysian and fails. Given that he is a reaper and no one can survive a reaper's touch except either a reaper or a giver, Elysian's secret is blown. But Cat doesn't really care about that so much as he cares about his mission failing. Realizing that he's screwed either way and he's not super big on going back to his own country where reapers are imprisoned their entire lives, Cat decides to let Elysian and his crew escort him to their country's much nicer prison. The prison holds the third point of view character, Elysian's adopted sister, Fenlia, who is a giver. The setup for this place they take Cat is kind of a monastery-like situation. There is one monastery that holds all the country's givers and one that holds all the country's reapers. They not only have general medical and studious duties, but they train new reapers and givers how to use their powers safely, correctly, and reach their potential. Mostly in Fenlia's case, she has difficulty with healing and does much better bringing things back from the dead, which is forbidden. While on their way to the monasteries, Elysian and Cat end up bonding and also getting a look at each other's perspectives, both Cat's timidity and lack of world experience through him having become a reaper very young, and Elysian having conflicted feelings about the way his country runs things and his own personal convictions. Now, these push and pull philosophies end up setting up the main idea of the rest of the book. The importances of life and death, where people's responsibilities lie when it comes to having these sorts of powers, and what are the ethics of how you treat people because they have abilities that scare you. Another thing I like about the series, where your mileage may vary, is that it goes a lot into what it means to be alive. Not just in a philosophical sense, but in a very scientific sense. They go very deep into the science of how cells work and how things that technically aren't alive have the qualities of life. When I say they go very into it, I don't mean like a college level science class, more like intro to biology in middle school, but still much more than I usually expect a fantasy series to go into the structure of plant cells versus animal cells. I really like this because a lot of fantasy series tend to draw a hard line between science and magic rather than looking at them as just two components of the same world. Now, I know sitting through an 8th grade science lesson isn't everybody's cup of tea, but I really enjoy the kind of series that go very into how somebody's magic works and how they can utilize it in different ways based on the exact nature of their powers. For a very basic example, think Toph from Avatar: The Last Airbender being able to invent metal bending because it is a refined form of earth. Each of the characters has a very strong will, and I think the way I would best describe it is that Fenlia is someone whose worldview is challenged, Kat is someone whose worldview is expanded, and Elysian is someone whose worldview is tested. Kat and Fenlia have this push and pull relationship for most of the book, where she has these very strong convictions and also a very strong hatred of not only Reapers, but of death itself. Kat, meanwhile, mostly seems happy to learn anything after his life of isolation. Fenlia has very combative opinions that she has to get over through the course of the series, and Kat has a lot of misgivings that he's more easy to overcome, but still has limited perspective. Kat's story is less about his convictions being immovable and stubborn, and much more about him gradually coming into his own and becoming a stronger person in multiple ways. Elysian is interesting in that he's a static character, but not in the way that people typically think of in modern day, where it's just boring cardboard cutout. Elysian is the epitome of goodness. And I don't mean in a shallow way, I mean he thinks through all of his convictions. He has had time to get to the place he is in, and he is a very morally strong character with a big heart. For example, he's one of the only people who actually gives Kat a chance right off the bat and is very friendly and generous and kind with him. Elysian believes very strongly in expanding the way that givers and reapers can help the country, while also understanding the importance of letting life and death continue in a cycle. He is also the type of person who, despite his convictions and understanding of his own importance in the world, will do his best to help anybody, even at detriment to himself. You don't even have to tell him. It's just in his nature. Because, baby, he's a giver. While Fenlia and Kat's story finds them spending most of their time together in the monastery compounds area, Elysian is, mild spoilers, almost immediately kidnapped and taken as a prisoner of war. I'm giving you that first act spoiler because it's very important to the continuing themes and parallels. With Kat and Fenlia being in a much nicer prison, it is still a prison. They are unable to leave. There are armed guards at the top of the wall that surrounds their compound. They get an education, they get food, they have a community, they are clothed. But at the same time, a prison is still a prison. They still feel trapped. They are unable to leave. They are unable to see the rest of the world, to see their families. Meanwhile, Elysian is put back in the Reaper cells the Kat came from, which it has much harsher conditions. I don't know if you remembered my Harriet Tubman live in concert review where I hinted at having to switch to a book with a torture scene to be less tortured by public outing. This is the book I was talking about. Not only do they have to deal with the general indignities that come with being in prison, there is a tiny little child prince who is basically Joffrey, but with less incest. He's a vile, evil 12-year-old who decides to just burn a woman's face with a torch for the heck of it. But it doesn't matter to him because they can heal and get better anyway, so he just sees it as playthings that don't deserve to live for the very fact of their being. See, Alalun isn't big on reapers or givers because they see it as interfering with their main goddess's purpose. It interferes with the essential flow of life and death in any capacity, whereas Soleil sees givers as encouraging their god's will and continuing on that work. That's why there's this imbalance rather than one country having their people and the other country having their set. Now, I've talked about Elysian and his moral compass. He is such an enjoyable character. He is static, but he is so easy to love and such a good friend. He has a good sense of humor. He's realistic without being cynical and optimistic without coming off as naive. He is a very intelligent character, and I love that. Cat is a character who is quiet and keeps to himself, and things are gradually revealed about him as you go, so I don't want to give away too much, but it's clear that he and Elysian have a lot in common. He's not as warm and outspoken, but he does have the same moral convictions and loyalty to people he cares about. If you haven't guessed already, the romantic subplot in this book is between Elysian, the Sunblessed Prince, and Cat, the assassin who failed to kill him. The book does a surprisingly good job of making the relationship developing between Cat and Elysian believable, despite the fact that they are apart from the majority of the book, which takes place over the course of about 2 years. So they basically have a road trip, then don't see each other for years, and then suddenly are supposed to have a romance in the second book, and it works. It's not like, oh, I met this guy for 3 weeks and now he's all I think about and I'm deeply in love with him. No, they left a positive impact on each other's lives and they think about each other from time to time, and it generally only occurs to them when it comes up naturally. Still, they think of each other often enough that by the end, when they're discussing potentially being together, you can see why that connection is there. Now, Fenlia is a really tough character to love. Hear me out here. Fenlia is like Muffin from Bluey. She's borderline insufferable because she is very accurately written for her age. The book takes place over the course of a little less than 2 years, so she starts the story as a 14-year-old and eventually grows into a 16-year-old, and we have to see the maturity level that comes with that. So she's excellently written in the sense that, of course, this is the mindset that she would have. I never found it to be insulting to her intelligence, like a lot of adult books with teenage characters tend to do, while also showing that this stubbornness and ignorance is very accurate to somebody of that age who has decided they know everything and they know what's best. Thankfully, through getting to know Kat and the other Reapers, she does grow to be a more open-minded, smarter person, and she becomes very capable in her own right. It also speaks to the world building, how resistant she is to the Reapers, because she is very much of her country, especially growing up with the royal family. And this is a direct contrast to Elysian, who I am very relieved they didn't just have him be nice and good to the Reaper because he's just that pure and innocent all on his own. It makes sense he would be more open-minded because as a child, his minder and bodyguard was a Reaper. He grew up with one as one of his caretakers and most trusted people. It makes a lot more sense to me that it would come from a place of already knowing somebody rather than just, oh, well, he's a good person, so he magically has no ignorance. I think that's a good way to describe Fenlia's storyline. Good people can be ignorant, but they can overcome those ignorances. I will say there is a good chunk of the story where Elysian isn't there, and it's a little disappointing it's not more evenly balanced. He ends up taking up the majority of the climax and later half of the book. It is almost entirely from his perspective, while he's missing from the majority of part 2. I'm hoping this becomes more balanced in the sequel, because where they're at, it looks like they're going to be more out and open in the world than in their isolated little corners. Supporting characters are really enjoyable. The fantasy names aren't too bad for the most part, except for the royal family in Soleil's. Like, I'm supposed to keep straight, like, 4 different A names that all have the same number of syllables. Like, I don't know what you want from me, man. I cannot keep the uncle and the father's name straight for the life of me. Most of my favorite supporting characters are going to be the ones that are in the monastery situation, because that is where we spend most of our time with other people. The Reaper cells get more of a look at the villains. And make no mistake, despite the countries having a bit more of a balance, Alaloon are the villains. The 2 countries have been at war over a single river for centuries, to the point where they don't even remember who started it, and the current queen is looking to start a war up again. And she's also struggling with not having a proper heir, because in their kingdom, females are the ideal, given you can have concrete proof of parentage, and she only has pseudo-Joffrey, whose name is Galage, which is just the worst possible name she could have given him. It sounds awful. No offense if there's anybody out there named Galage. I'm sorry, it's terrible. On that note, huge props to the audiobook reader. It is a lot easier to get into the fantasy names when I'm not futzing over how to pronounce everything, and I don't have the spellings in my head, making it even harder to keep the different similar names straight. The audio reader is also really good at doing convincing voices for such a multitude of characters. He can do the big, bold leader voice that Elysian has, can convincingly sound like a bratty 14-year-old girl without sounding like a joking impersonation, has a soft-spoken French accent for Cat, and the snotty, high-pitched child voice that he gives Galage is just so perfectly punchable and irritating. It weirdly sounds like Scott McNeil from Teen Titans. Just the voice differentiation is so good, and it really helps like make the characters feel tangible. I gotta look up what the audio reader's name is. I'll put it on the screen if I remember, but just so good. The Sunblessed Prince is the first book in a duology, and the sequel comes out April 28th, I believe. So that's one of the reasons I re-listened to it. This is not a new read for me, but I want to bring attention to it because I love this book so much, and I know nobody else who has read it. So few people who have read it. Like, if you go on AO3, there's nothing for it. Do you know what has more AO3 coverage than this book? Little Bunny Foo-Foo has more fics than this book does. Now, the sequel to this, The Moonblessed King, I'm looking so forward to it because the first book ended in a somewhat ambiguous place, and I really want to see what goes from here now that the characters have more space to expand and travel the world more freely. But yeah, love the characters in this, love the character development. I love how much emphasis there is on platonic friendships and community. Like, one of the main themes that I didn't go into is not only that a prison is a prison no matter what, but that you can create a community even in the most adverse of circumstances. And that, in many ways, adversity is what creates a community. And that's something I can feel very strongly in our current political climate. Alright, that is it for The Sunblessed Prince by Lindsey Byrd, and I will see you after the next book.